Alright, welcome back and thanks for tuning in again. So today we're going to pick up where we left off on this 45 kW genset. This is the one that's powered by the 354 series 6-cylinder Perkins. So we had a couple issues with it in the last video, namely fuel injection pump or fuel system issues. We did a compression test on it. We're going to pick up pretty much where we left off. I got the injectors out. We're going to pull this pump off and start disassembling it to see if we can identify if there's any worn governor components in here, and if there's not, we'll just go ahead, clean it, and reseal it, and we'll put the injectors back in. So let's get started. Alright, well, I've done a little prep work to remove this injection pump. I've removed the fuel filter housing and the lines feeding it, the shutdown solenoid and its bracket, just to give me better access. So if I interpret the manual correctly, the only thing we need to do to remove this pump is rotate the engine so that number one cylinder is at top dead center on its compression stroke. So I found top dead center on compression by leaving this plastic plug in here and barring the engine over until it popped out. That told me we were on the compression stroke. And then there is a line scribed. Let's see if I can give you an angle here. See that? It's not really scribed, but it's an indent on the pulley there on the top side of that groove. And then there's a timing pointer, which is just a little tin thing. Let me sneak you in here. See it? See them lining up there? I also had a little brass rod down the injector bore riding on top of the piston, so as I was turning the engine over, I could see that rod come up, and when it just started, well, when it just hit its top point where it stopped on its upstroke, that line was lined up. The injection pump shaft should be not keyed, but they have what's called a master spline. So the splines for the injection pump drive shaft can only go in one way. And then we can see that there's a witness mark here on the body of the injection pump, which is aluminum, and the injection pump drive plate, which is steel. So that looks like a factory witness mark there. So we can see that's aligned. So we know that as long as we don't rotate the engine when that pump is out, we should be able to drop the pump back in, make sure that those lines are lined up, and tighten everything down. As you can see, these holes are elongated. So I'm going to go ahead and take these 3 nuts off, and we should be able to just lift this thing right out. Well, with those 3 nuts removed off the studs, this thing should just kind of pop right out of here. Probably going to leak everywhere, isn't it? Okay. Yep, see that keyed spline there? It should have a mating one here. Right there. Okay, that's good news. Yeah, that was easy enough. Well, let's take this inside, set it up on the bench, and start taking it apart. Oh, yep, I knew it was going to leak somewhere. It's okay, that's what we got these mats for. Alright, so we got the pump in here, mounted on a little plate of steel just to hold it. I've already taken this side plate off just out of curiosity to see what was in there. I didn't know if it was like the Reassemble pumps where, you know, you can see you got to line the timing marks up, but that wasn't the case. I really haven't done anything with these pumps in the past. I've had to replace these gaskets around the top housing here, so I've taken this off in the past and unhooked the spring and replaced the gasket and things like that. But other than that, I've never been into like the governor or the drive or like the hydraulic head. I don't even know if that's what they call this area. I know on the old Bosch pumps they call that the hydraulic head. I've taken the little cap off here for the fuel pressure regulating valve, just out of curiosity. So let's start taking a look at it. So the injection pump shop said that the injectors had contamination, which pretty much means that there was dirt and varnish and stuff in the injectors. So, and just taking this off, let me turn this light on. You can see on that spring, Yeah, a little ugly. So I wonder how far that's gotten. I wonder if the vanes on the little fuel pump back here are scored up due to that. But we'll just start laying everything out. There's a little screen in here as well, which I got a new one in the seal kit for this. Might be just easier to take this out when it's on the bench. It doesn't seem to want to come out. There's a little plunger here. You can see that. Yeah, all kinds of junk in here, actually. We might have to wrap that on the table once we get it off to get all the rest of that stuff out of there. Well, I guess we'll just pull the outlet tubes off. Like 13 or 14 millimeter. Fourteens. 14 plus paint. Probably 14 and a half now. Plus a lot of paint. Wow. Or they are actually 15s. Okay, hang on. Tight, whatever they are. Everybody's going to yell at me for hammering with my hand. Wow. Yeah, they weren't kidding when they said contamination. It's hard to say. It almost looks like there's some kind of RTV silicone on here. Some kind of sealant. Either that or there's an O-ring that's stuck to this plate here. A square section O-ring. Almost looks like that began to melt and kind of ooze out around here. You want to take a look? There's the vane pump. There is a locating dowel or a pin, like a roll pin. Yeah, it's a roll pin. Oh, something just fell out of there. Spring. Little dowel pin. Guess keeps that from spinning. These vanes, I believe, just should pop out. All right, let's pull these vanes out. Maybe I have to pull the ring out first. Oh, yep, here they come. There's a one vane stayed in there. There's the other. Okay. We'll take a more close look at those later. I'm going to try to lay them on the bench inside the cam ring in the orientation they came out, or in the orientation they came out. This isn't the cam ring. This is the, I don't know what you call this. The cam ring is deeper inside there. And then they got the word off with an arrow here. So, seems like that must unthread. But I believe this whole assembly should come out. I think I have to take this out, this bolt here, the little bleeder screw, and then I think I might have to pull the advance mechanism off, and there might be a bolt under that. Okay, we're still moving along. Pull this little damper off of here. Little sealing washer there. Now this is an advanced timing advance mechanism, which I believe is based on fuel pressure. The amount of fuel pressure that the vane pump here generates moves a piston in this cylinder, which rotates the cam ring. So that changes your timing because it assumes that fuel pressure is going to increase as the engine speed increases, and as the engine speed increases, the timing advance should increase. So we get a 13 there. As long as I don't, well, you know what? I don't know. As long as I don't pop this cap off of here, it shouldn't change anything. I will have to pop this off though. Yeah. There's another sealing washer, of course. So that's the cam ring. That sits in this little pocket here, and based upon fuel pressure, it moves the cam ring and either advances or retards the timing. Okay. So now that the bleeder, that bolt, and that damper are removed, this should want to pull out, as far as I understand it. It's been sealed in there with paint. Can't get a grip on it, all that paint. I have to use a strap wrench or something. Maybe just a larger pair of channel locks. All right, well, before we resort to the larger pair of channel locks, let's take the top cover off, because I have a feeling something's holding us up other than those 3 bolts. Now, we were able to get it to move. It does rotate, but it doesn't want to come off, so I'm going to pull this top cover off. See what's holding us up here. There's not a whole lot under here, if I remember correctly. There's a spring. All right, there's a governor spring. Disconnect that. And there's this little pin. So we got 3 positions here, and then 3 positions here on the little, this is the governor lever. And it was in the center here, and it's in the center one there. See, I have a feeling that's your sensitivity adjustment right there, because that's where the spring is anchored to in relation to the fulcrum that the lever pivots on. Oh, maybe that's what was holding us up. That's the metering valve. Oh, broke that. Yeah, that's probably what was holding us up there. Don't want to break that. Okay, it's just a little shutdown lever, where the shutdown lever interacts with this and forces it to no fuel. Can I pull this off of here? Maybe take this whole plate off to get the metering valve out, because that's what's holding us up, I have a feeling. Oh, okay, never mind. Okay, that's the metering valve. Where's the light at? A little bit of staining on that. Actually, is that a little cut there? Or is that little milled groove supposed to be in there? See that? Right there. I don't feel a burr on it. So now that that's free, that should pop right out of there. Yes. Okay. Alright, and that spline is keyed as well. So that can only go back in one way. Okay. Let's see what's inside here. There's the cam ring. Interesting. So that little stud at the bottom here has two flats on it, and I can see some threads here. So that should unthread and allow me to pull out the cam ring. And it looks like we got a big C-clip in there, an internal snap ring to pull out. And the governor should be able to come out way down in there. You can see the flyweights and everything. We can inspect that. Got to take this top plate off so we can get the lever off. Let's do that next. Alright, well, I've kind of jumped ahead a little bit here. Sorry about that. But I think we left off with, we got to remove this little control plate here where the governor lever mounts to. That's just got these two studs. Now they were little locking tabs, had to bend over to get these out. So set them down. And then there's a third one. Little 8mm screw here with another little locking tab. And this whole assembly lifts straight out. You got to watch there's a little spring on the back here. You don't want to get that spring caught on the inside lip here and break it. So just work it around, it'll come out. You can really see all the staining from the diesel fuel, where the fuel wasn't contacting and where it was all over here. Kind of a sticky varnish. So what we're left with, there's a large retaining ring here, which the hydraulic head just kind of butts up against that. Got to pull that out, and then we got the governor and then the drive input shaft over here. We got to pull that out. I got this 8mm Allen key. There's a little Allen bolt down in the bottom there. Pull that retaining ring out. And then this bolt was fairly tight in here. So what I was able to do, now this might not be the best practices, so we got a spline here, and we have access to that spline through the little window. I've got a baby pair of channel locks here, which with a little finagling, I was able to push them through the window here, like that, and they engage with the spline in a pretty positive way, like that, so you don't really have to worry about them slipping. Now I'm sure there's a tool for this, naturally, tool for everything, and I was able to hold the spline and loosen this bolt here, counterclockwise to loosen it. So, and then the drive hub here, the spline that's on this side of the drive hub continues on to the base of the governor assembly. So that can only go together one way. Let me put you on the tripod here. We need to get that out to inspect the governor and to replace the lip seal that's in there. So with that loose, I can hold the governor with one hand, take this or loosen this bolt that's in the drive coupling, and then push on the back of this Allen key to separate the two. Okay, there's the governor right there. See the keyed spline? And then the little drive nose pulls out. With a little bolt. And there's a lock washer and a flat washer in there as well. But this here is the bearing surface for the front of the pump. And then that seal rides right there. Just a regular lip seal. Right there. So that's more or less it for the body of the pump. Nothing really left here but an aluminum shell. We got to pop this fitting out. That's just the leak-off fitting for the pressure in the case. Then there's a little stud left in here. Doesn't really hold anything up, but that's it. We could take this and get all this paint off and clean it all up. The last thing we got to do is the hydraulic head here. We want to pull this apart and make sure that the little pistons are in good shape, and then we don't have any scoring on the head there. So let me pull this out of the vise and we'll put the hydraulic head in. Okay, got the hydraulic head here. So we've got to pull off the little vane guide, or the vane holder for the vane pump. It's got the word off printed on it there with a little arrow. So I'm going to just hold the heads of these two screws in the vise here. Shouldn't take a whole lot of force, just to hold that steady. And then I've got a little piece of aluminum here. This is 1/8 inch, I believe. And that fits really snugly right there in the place of where one of the vanes would be. And then just take an adjustable wrench, grip the aluminum, and then that threads right off of there. I've already had this apart, obviously. It was a little bit tighter than that. But use aluminum, that way you don't risk damaging this. So we'll set that aside. Pull this back out of the vise. And you have to watch when you pull this apart. There's a little plate in here. Right there. which retains, that plate retains the little pistons there. So put your fingers on the pistons and pull it apart, the little rollers. Okay, and there's the little drive plate. Not really a drive plate. This plate sets the maximum fuel that the pump can deliver. See the cut there? It's cut on a ramp. Oops, sorry about that. It's cut on a ramp. So depending on where this plate and it's got a little tab that interlocks with the plate back here. Depending on where they're at in regard to the plungers, that controls how wide the plungers can spread and essentially how much fuel that they can take in one shot. So let's get this back on the bench and pull those rollers out. Alright, let's take these little plungers out. I'll take this drive plate off, or the maximum fuel plate. I don't know why I keep calling it a drive plate. And I want to keep the plungers oriented as they are now. So I've got a little letter D written here and a little H written here. That's just corresponding to the letter that's nearby on this plate. So letter D meets up with this roller, and letter H with this one. And then we got the little pistons. Grab a pick here, push them through. H. And D. I want to keep them oriented correctly. And there we go. That's about as far as we're going to take this thing apart. No reason to loosen these screws and worry about adjusting the maximum fuel settings. Looks like we got one more screw in the bottom there. That's probably just a cap for the drilled passageway that's through here. We're going to leave that alone. But this is quite an ingenious setup here, I gotta say. It's a good way to accomplish a task with the minimum amount of parts. The downside is these parts here get quite a bit of wear, much more so than the comparable parts would get if this was like an inline pump. Because remember, these two pistons here are compressing the fuel for all 6 injectors. So these are doing 6 times the duty that the pistons in an inline pump would do, for example. But yeah, pretty interesting. Let me clean everything up, and then we'll go into a bit more detail. You know what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll follow the path of the fuel through the pump when we reassemble the thing. But that's about it. That's what's inside the DPA pump. The CAV DPA pump. Got a lot of cleaning to do. Especially this fuel pressure regulator. That screen really did its job. Caught a lot of junk. Yeah, look at it all. Okay. I'll be back in a sec. Alright, well, I've started to clean some of these components. The main housing, got all the paint removed off of that. Pretty well cleaned out. The cap that houses the throttle shaft and the shutdown shaft, it's all been cleaned up. And I've been concentrating on the governor itself, so we got it all taken apart just for inspection of the flyweights, the little basket that holds them. There's a thrust washer here, the governor spool with a collar, which is plastic. I wasn't expecting that, plastic with a little piece of little sheet metal on the top here. But I don't see anything that I would consider significant wear. I mean, there's a polished area right there, right on the little foot there, where the governor weights act on that thrust washer. A little polished area at the heel of the governor weight, where it pivots, but nothing that I'd consider to be worn out. Here's the thrust washer. See the polished area where those weights have been riding? That area is polished, and there is just a barely detectable bit of wear there that you can feel with your fingernail, but barely detectable. So we're gonna run that, put all this back together, put it back in the pump housing, and then we'll move on to cleaning the hydraulic head and all the rest of the fuel, delivery components. But I want to get this done, try to clear the bench off a little bit. Let's get to it. This is the seal kit that I'm using. Spaco diesel. So again, it's just a seal kit. There's no hard parts here. Got new lip seal, new gaskets, little seal rings, O-rings. So not replacing any hard parts, just resealing the thing. Set you up here. We'll pop this new lip seal in. I'm gonna reassemble it with just or reassemble the pump with just 3-in-1 oil. Just as it's a light oil. Should be good for this application. The seal's not a real tight fit, which is probably a good thing. Just kind of tap it in there flush. Still a little bit high over here. Okay. Set that aside. Let's reassemble the governor here. Okay. So I'm just going to pop the weights back in the basket here. Oop. Come on. Even shot there? Yep. Going to reassemble that thrust washer back in the way it came. That polished end down on the weights, on the foot of the weights. Put the little governor collar or governor spool back in there. That. Pop that whole thing on the governor shaft. Okay. And then we got this little drive spline. Got to sit down there like that, and it's kind of fiddly to do this, so I'm holding the assembly by the governor collar, by the bottom of the governor collar. See that? And I have to hold the weight assembly in the basket at a specific height, like that. And then we got these 4 little rubber crescent shapes, which they appear to be like a damper of sorts between the basket, the governor basket with the weights in it, and this little splined drive washer. So gotta snap them back in. Two. these still feel fairly supple. I mean, it's a pretty firm rubber. That might not be the right position for that one. And they're definitely a good fit. Come on. There we go. One more. It's probably just to cushion the whole assembly from vibration. Keep it from wearing the splines out. Am I still in frame? Yep. That last one does not want to sit in there. Might have to swap a couple of them around. Get them to fit correctly. I couldn't think of a good way to mark these that wouldn't get, you know, washed off or cleaned off when I wiped it down with solvent. There we go. Okay, so they're all sitting in place. And then there's a keyed washer, which I can see that there's a wear pattern here, so I know that that goes on the outside because that's that butts up against the thrust face of the internal surface of the pump housing. So we got to drop that down. Okay, and it's got these little cutouts. We have to rotate it. There's a gap in the splines there. See that gap where I can spin this washer? So I got to rotate it. Bring it down underneath the heads of those pins, and then rotate it back. Come on, and then rotate it back. There we go. And the whole thing's got to drop down like that. So now that washer is captive underneath of those pins. And then there's a large O-ring that just sits in this groove to kind of keep the whole thing captive. That O-ring is right here. I didn't even open the package yet. Right there. Gonna put a little bit of oil on it. Help it slide over them splines. Just has to sit right in there. Like that. Okay. Okay. I'll go ahead and I'm going to oil this whole thing up. We'll put the pump housing on a little stand, a little plate, and we'll pop this back in. Alright, well, we got the pump housing on a little stand here. Now, I got to tell you something. I test fitted the governor and the drive nose in here, and I found that it was tight. Tighter than it should have been. And I think I made a mistake installing that lip seal. So here it is here. There's the new seal. This area here is the machined face of the pump casting, the pump body. So I installed it, you know, with just like a little seal driver tool, and that left me with the seal being just about flush with this machined area here. And what I found was that it actually needs to be a little bit below the surface here. So you don't want the face of the seal to drag on the flange here, the flange of this drive nose, because when these are assembled, the inner surface here, the inner surface here butts right up against this washer, this drive plate, like that. So you have a finite or a defined amount of space between this surface and this surface. And with the seal being proud of that casting, it was dragging on this flange. So I just went and I tapped it down a little bit below the surface. There was plenty of room here in this this little counterboard area for it to sit down a little bit further. So with that being said, let's actually do something. So I put a little bit of oil on this bearing. We already got some oil on the seal. I'm going to put some oil on the drive nose. Slide that in and spin it so the master spline is vertical. Okay. The governor's nice and oiled up. There we go. Spline's lined up. And we'll tighten that screw. Okay, so now I got to grip that spline, this spline here, with my little baby pair of channel locks. Pass them in through here. I'm going to rotate this so we get a good grip somewhere. We don't want it to slip. Okay. And I'm sure there's a torque spec for this screw, but we're just going to go ahead and get about 5 mic pounds. Sneak these out of here. Come on. Go. There we go. Spins nice and freely. Okay, move you around over here, and we'll go ahead and set the, bring this up, bring you down. Set the little governor plate back on. These 2 little feet here have to engage that governor collar. It's got to be rotated a certain way so it'll line up. Set that in there, then we got a plate. Ooh, it's got an elongated hole. Okay, spin that around. Put the little locking ears forward toward the drive end. And we got one more little tiny screw and a locking plate for that. That's a number 8, or 8mm. Nope, not that. Or is it not an 8? I forget. Nope, it's not an 8. I lied to you. What is it, 7? Of course it's a 7. And these up here were 10s. Wherever that is, there it is. Well, it's time to reassemble the hydraulic head here. So let's take a look at it before we do that. Let me turn the light on. Right here we got the bore that the little pistons ride in. That looks fine. Little hole, this is the discharge hole for the distribution to each cylinder. These are the supply holes. The pistons themselves are in fine shape. Nothing wrong there. You can see a little bright spot there. Right there, that's where they're driven. Then there's a corresponding bright spot on the roller. Not the roller, but the carrier. Right there. The rollers look to be in fine shape. Let's go ahead and start putting it back together. Here's my oil. Put some oil on the pistons. Okay. So this is the D side, and this is the H side. So we'll pop that one in. They're a snug fit. Yeah, if they don't go in there perfectly straight, they get wedged. There we go. H. Okay. Push them all the way in. Get some oil on the roller there. Roll that around. Rest that in like that. And again on the H side. Okay. Then we can set the little retaining ring, or the maximum fuel ring, whatever the technical term for that is. Okay. Alright, that's the pumping end. Oil that up. That off. And here's the actual head, the distributor head. That cleaned up very nice. Looks good. There we go. Very nice. See the little screw in the center there? I said earlier that that's probably just a hole that they had to drill to get the bore down the center, and that's just a cap. Luckily the seal kit came with a new copper washer, so I was able to replace that. Helped a lot with cleaning it out. Then we got to set this back in the vise because we have to thread the vane guide for the vane pump. We have to go ahead and tighten that just a little bit. So move you over here. Do the same thing. We got that piece of aluminum. Set that in there. There's probably a torque spec, of course, but it doesn't need to be very tight, I don't think. It wasn't very tight removing it. So there's the hydraulic head. Let's set the pump back in, pump body. I've already got the cam ring reinstalled here. Do the same thing. We'll set the spline. Well, I guess it doesn't really matter where it's at. You know what we'll do is we'll look at this. And the rollers, the rollers are lined up with the key for the spline. So we will rotate the key here to the out where the rollers would be at the outermost point, or the lowest part of the cam, just so they don't get hung up. Put a little bit of oil on the cam itself. A little bit of extra oil on the rollers. Okay. Oh God, I almost forgot to put the O-ring on. That would have been, I would have been saying, well, why in the heck is this thing leaking? I got that O-ring installed right there. The cam's lubed up. The rollers are lubed up. So we just have to get the spline lined up. Let's see. We're going to have it, and I can hold it with this end. Okay. It's engaged. Maybe I should put a little bit of oil on the on there. There's a little chamfer around the pump here to kind of help the O-ring go in. It's just about there. Got to rotate it a little bit. Bolt holes are going to line up. So now I really shouldn't leave it where it's at now because I have to rotate it to get the metering valve in. So let's clean the metering valve up now. Pop that in, and then we can rotate it to where it needs to be. Alright, so I've installed the metering valve in the hydraulic head, connected up the linkage for it there. We'll take another look at that once we put the top cap on. But right now we're going to go ahead and put the actuator for the timing advance on it and the vane pump. So we got the parts laid out for that here. This is the advance mechanism here, the little piston that slides the hydraulic or the cam ring back and forth, the two springs. There were two shims in there, so it looks like probably a combination of springs and shims is how you get the correct advance for whatever application you have. A couple O-ring seals. The piston actually is labeled with, it looks like, see that? 2 degrees plus 3 or 5, you see that? 2 degrees plus 3. I'm not sure what that exactly is referring to. It might be this particular piston to work in conjunction with these springs. But well, the nice thing is there's no like adjustment screw to worry about. It's fixed between the springs and the shim washers here. So we're going to go ahead and put this back together and install it on the pump. Let me set you down. Oh, that's too close, isn't it? Way too close. Let's back you out. Okay. All these components cleaned up pretty well. We're just, again, lubricating everything with 3-in-1 oil here. Okay. Get a rag. We're just going to set this gasket on here. We're not going to use any kind of sealant or anything. So, I don't know if, well, we'll go through this real quick. So, the fuel comes up out of this hole right here, passes up into the damper, sitting right there, that's the new one, passes up into the damper, and then there's a drilled hole. Let me turn this light on. See this hole right up here? You can actually see the light through it. That drilled passageway leads over to this boss here. So the fuel comes up, exits the side of the damper, goes around this boss, fills this cavity, comes into this hole, and that's what applies fuel pressure on this piston to move the cam ring, and then the springs on the other side push back against that. So with this set, set that right on there. Got just a copper sealing washer and a cap on this side. And then the new damper to replace the original, which was leaking, has just these two O-rings on it. Okay. That's a 19 and that's a 13. Okay. I can still move freely. And we have just a cap on this side with an O-ring seal. I'll have to get the correct wrench to tighten that down all the way. The other side receives both springs, one inside the other. Load them in there. The cap with an O-ring seal. And the two little shims. Put a little oil on them just to help them stick together. Okay. And they get loaded right in and compressed. Now there is a small plug with a seal on it on this end, which may be an air bleeder point. A little screw with a little rubber sealing washer. That screw does not touch the springs in any way. That might be a stop, possibly for the piston, like a maximum travel stop. But with that rubber sealing washer, doesn't seem to be a very accurate way to set a stopping point. This is not the correct wrench. We'll just snug them right now with an adjustable here. I'll have to get the correct wrench. Okay. That's the timing advance. Let me move you around and we'll put the vane pump on. So before we install the vane pump, we've got to reassemble the fuel pressure regulating valve. So I ended up buying a new cap for the vane pump here, which houses the regulating valve. Here's the original. I'm not sure if this is a factory finish here or if somebody tried to smooth that out on a piece of concrete. Looks a little rough, and it's dirty in there, and it was just easier to buy a new one at the time. So we got new head, we got a new, let's see, pump liner, they call that, transfer pump liner, and 2 new pump blades, they call these. They don't call them vanes. So let's go ahead and reassemble this pressure regulating valve. First, we're going to drop this little tiny spring. It's a very soft spring. That drops all the way down to the bottom of that bore there. Sits right in that hole down there. I have everything oiled up already. We got the main body. Has a little cap that sits on there, like that. Got a sealing washer, like a fiber sealing washer. There's an intermediate spring, and then a little piston. All these components cleaned up quite well. Get my little pick, push that in there a little bit more. Okay. This whole assembly drops down. Rests on that spring. That sealing washer rests on a on the ledge of the little counterboard that the spring sits in. So the spring's down in here, and the little counterboard is right above here. So that sits down on that. Got the filter screen. That sits down around there. You kind of have to push it down around the body. Okay. And there's a fairly heavy spring. This is what keeps tension on that whole body. This is what pushes that whole valve body down on that lip that the sealing washer sits on. That sits right on the cap there. Then I got a new copper sealing washer for the cap. Put a little oil on those threads. A little more than a little, it's okay. Okay, and the cap keeps everything pressed together like that. And we'll tighten that cap up once we have this on the body. So let's move you over back to the pump. Put a little bit of oil in here. Set the pump liner in. And the pump blades. Gonna get plenty of oil in here. Okay. Let me rotate the pump. You see the operation, how the vanes move back and forth? A little bit extra oil in there just to keep it from running dry while we're cranking it before it gets fuel in it. Rubber seal there. Right. And then there's locating pin that holds the pump ring there. Okay. Pump still rotates nice and freely. Alright, we're really making progress. So now, I forgot to tighten these two bolts down, which isn't a big deal. I think we got a 11mm here for the bleeder screw. And is it a 13 over here? Yep. Of course, new sealing washers on those as well. Alright. Really coming along. Let's spin it back over and put the cap back on. Alright, well, we're down to our last handful of components. Got the injection pump cover, or top, houses the governor and the governor spring rather. I've already pulled these shafts out here and put new O-rings on them. The 6 discharge fuel pipes and the nuts, bolts for those, governor spring. So the spring I'm a little bit suspicious of. Can you see that there's a gap between those coils there? And you can see that I can compress the spring. So it seems to be overextended. I don't know if it's supposed to be like this. I don't have another one to compare it to. I see there are multiple springs for this pump listed on the internet in various parts breakdowns, so I'm not sure how to determine which spring this pump requires. We're going to reassemble it with this one right now and see how the pump performs. I have a couple other little adjustments that I might try before replacing this spring, but it is a little bit odd to me that that spring is not fully compressed in its resting state. Alright, well, let's just go ahead and reassemble it. Enough talking. I might get in the way of your view, but that's just going to have to be that way. So, got the cap here. The spring gets hooked on the center hole here. That's the way it was when we took it apart. Okay, just like that. And the other end of the spring gets hooked on the center hole on the governor lever. See the 3 holes here? 1, 2, 3. I believe that's a sensitivity adjustment, but we're going to reinstall it in the center hole. That's where it was when we took it apart. If it's determined that that might help the governor response, which I think it would, if we move it to the lower hole, that will increase governor sensitivity. Yeah, I'm definitely going to get in your way when I reconnect this spring, but you're just going to have to tolerate that for a second. Okay, that's reconnected. There's a little peg that passes through that hole there with a little spring on the back of it. We also have the shutdown rod installed right here. You see this? The stop lever hooks to that, and that forces the... Oh gosh, I'm losing the word right now. Oh gosh, I can't think of it. Now it forces that closed. So we're just gonna set that on there. Metering rod. I don't know why I couldn't think of the name. Forces the metering rod closed. So the governor spring acts to pull the metering rod all the way open. The internal governor acts to pull back on the governor lever and pull the metering valve closed. See the metering valve swinging around down here? The stop lever overrides whatever the throttle is telling it to do and whatever the governor's telling it to do, and it forces that metering valve shut. So that's the like the master control for the whole thing. So we got all that connected. We have to get the peg right here lined up with the notch on the stop lever, which that shouldn't be too difficult to do. Might be a bit difficult if you got a camera in your way, but I'm not complaining. There it goes. Almost. There we go. I can hear the metering valve getting shoved to no fuel when I move this. Everything seems to be fitting correctly. Okay. We got 2 studs here. Hold the cover down. Got 2 sealing washers. And the little cap nuts. Okay. Alrighty. Let's go ahead and pop these fuel pipes on. Okay, I think we can call this pump done. One thing I didn't mention is these discharge pipes, they can only go on one way. What I mean is they have to be, one side has to be facing out. They do have a little step on them right here. You see, we got a sealing washer, and a step. This step has to be down. If it's not, then the pipe itself won't clear the hydraulic head housing. When you tighten it down, it'll be resting on this point and you won't get these to seal. So just something to be aware of. But hey, I think it went pretty good. This is the first time I ever went through one of these pumps. So it might have been a little, might have had a few stumbling blocks there, but I think it turned out good. Hopefully it performs as good as it looks. So if you've kept with the video to this point, I thank you. I know it's been a long one. Next video we'll put this back on the engine and we'll hook it up to the load bank again and see how that governor performs. So thanks very much for watching.